In 2016, a Special Operations Combat Surgeon published a single sentence that detonated across every firearms forum on the internet. His name is Dr. Dan Pronk. He completed his medical training on an Australian Army scholarship, served the bulk of his career with Special Operations units, deployed 4 times to Afghanistan, and ran more than 100 combat missions. This is a man who has pulled bullets out of living human beings under fire. And this is what he wrote, word for word. Admittedly, I'd rather not be shot with either, but if I had to choose, I'd take a round from the AK-47 over the M4 any day of the week. Read that again. A trauma surgeon who has stood over gunshot wounds from both of these cartridges in active war zones says that if someone forced a rifle on him and made him pick which bullet enters his body, he picks the bigger one, the 7.62 by 39, the heavy Soviet slug everybody assumes hits like the hand of God. He would rather take that round than the small, skinny 5.56 fired from the American rifle. That choice breaks something inside the gun community, because it runs against everything the marketing has trained shooters to believe. The AK round is wider. It is heavier. It leaves the muzzle carrying more raw energy. So why does the man holding the scalpel fear the smaller bullet more than the larger one? The answer is the thing the rifle industry has spent 60 years keeping just out of view. And by the end of this breakdown, every shooter watching is going to be able to walk to their own safe, pull out their own rifle, measure their own barrel, and know, with cold certainty, whether the round in their magazine will do what they think it does. This is HuntForge. Let's get to work. Start with the mechanism, because it is the whole story. The reason a combat surgeon fears the 5.56 is that the 5.56 does not behave like a bullet inside the body. It behaves like a grenade with a fuse made of speed. When a standard 55-grain 5.56 round traveling fast enough strikes soft tissue, the sudden change in density rips its stability away. The bullet yaws. It turns sideways, and at that violent angle, the thin copper jacket cannot survive the shearing forces. It tears us apart at the cannelure, the crimping groove around its middle, and explodes into a snowstorm of lead and copper fragments. Those fragments fan outward, each one carving its own path, multiplying a single wound into a constellation of them. The permanent wound cavity ends up far wider than the caliber has any right to produce. The 7.62 by 39 does almost the opposite, and the man who proved it was Dr. Martin L. Fackler, Colonel, United States Army Medical Corps, director of the Wound Ballistics Laboratory at the Letterman Army Institute of Research, and the surgeon who treated battle casualties in Da Nang, Vietnam in 1968, before he ever picked up a block of ballistic gelatin. Fackler is the father of modern wound ballistics. He didn't theorize, he measured. What Fackler documented about the original Soviet M43 round is brutal in its simplicity. That bullet, a boat-tail design with a mild steel core wrapped in lead and a copper-plated jacket, is so stable that it travels point forward through nearly 26 centimeters of tissue, roughly 10 inches, before it even begins to yaw. 10 inches. The average human torso is thinner than that, which means the feared AK round frequently drives straight through a body in a clean, narrow line and exits with most of its mass intact, leaving a wound a surgeon described as comparable to a non-expanding handgun bullet. Devastating if it strikes the spine, the heart, the liver, but predictable, patchable. That is the first lie cracked open. The bigger bullet is more survivable. The smaller bullet is the surgeon's nightmare, because finding and extracting hundreds of microscopic fragments buried in shredded tissue is a horror that the clean channel of an AK round simply does not create. The 5.56 destroys with velocity. The 7.62 plows with mass. They are not two versions of the same weapon. They are two different philosophies of violence. But notice the word doing all the work in that sentence about the 5.56. Fast enough. Hold on to it. Because that single qualifier is where the industry buried the body. Here is the truth that no short-barrel rifle ad will ever say out loud. The 5.56's terror, its fragmentation, is not a property of the bullet, it is a property of speed. Fackler's own laboratory work established the line in the sand. Legacy ball ammunition, like M193, needs to strike flesh at roughly 20,700 feet per second to reliably come apart. Between 2,500 and 2,700, fragmentation becomes a coin flip. The bullet might break, might just bend. Below 2,500 feet per second, that same round stops being a grenade and becomes nothing more than a tiny solid spike, poking a quiet .22 caliber hole clean through the target. Now here is where the industry's silence becomes a betrayal. Eugene Stoner and the Armalite team. And it was Stoner's engineer Jim Sullivan who scaled the rifle down, built this cartridge around a 20-inch barrel. Out of 20 inches, the round screams out fast enough to stay above that fragmentation threshold to roughly 200 meters. That is the weapon as designed. That is the weapon that works. But 20-inch rifles don't sell on social media. 10.3-inch SBRs do. The tactical industry spent the last 15 years selling shooters short, aggressive carbines, MK-18 clones, truck guns, room clearers, because they photograph like a video game and feel like special operations in your hands. What the marketing copy leaves out is what happens to the physics. Chop that barrel down and the powder no longer has time to fully burn. The bullet leaves the muzzle slower, and out of a 10.3-inch barrel, a standard 5.56 ball round can drop below that 2,700 FPS fragmentation threshold within roughly 50 yards. Sit with that. A shooter who bought a short 5.56 carbine for home and property defense, believing they own a fragmenting man-stopper, may in reality be carrying a rifle that, past their own driveway, does nothing but punch skinny holes. The lethality they paid for evaporated inside the barrel they were sold, and nobody told them. This is the thing every shooter can verify tonight. Pull the rifle. Read the barrel length. If it is short, and it is loaded with standard ball ammo, the effective fragmentation range is far smaller than the box implied, and the fix is either a longer barrel or a modern bonded or expanding load engineered to open at lower velocity. That is a decision the owner gets to make, but only if someone finally hands them the number the industry kept off the label. And this is precisely where the 7.62x39 quietly wins an argument it was never given credit for. Because the Soviet round wounds through mass and momentum rather than explosive velocity. It does not care nearly as much about barrel length. A heavy 123-grain slug out of a stubby 10-inch AK barrel still arrives like a sledgehammer. It does not need to be fast. It only needs to be heavy and moving. For a genuinely short, rugged rifle where the owner refuses to pay $2 a round for specialized expanding ammunition, the 7.62x39 keeps doing its job long after the short-barreled 5.56 has gone quiet. Stretch the distance, though, and the math flips hard in the other direction. The 7.62x39 leaves the muzzle carrying real authority, roughly 220 foot-pounds more energy than the 5.56. That advantage is genuine, and up close it matters. But the AK round is a short, blunt, high-drag projectile, and it sheds velocity fast. By 300 yards, the energy gap has nearly closed, and the trajectory tells an even harsher tale. Push out to 400 yards. The heavy Soviet bullet drops roughly 44 inches, nearly 4 feet of holdover. The light, aerodynamic 5.56 in the same conditions drops only about 24 to 25 inches. The American round also fights the wind better. A 10-mile-per-hour crosswind shoves the 7.62 nearly 28 inches off target at that distance, while the 5.56 drifts closer to 19. This is not trivia. This is hit probability. A flatter bullet means less guesswork on range, less holdover, a forgiving margin for the shooter whose distance estimate is off by 20 yards. And it scales to logistics, the same reason the U.S. military made the switch in the first place. A soldier hauling lightweight 5.56 can carry dramatically more ammunition for the same weight than the old battle rifle rounds. The 5.56 was engineered to put more rounds, flatter, into more targets by more average shooters. At distance, in open country, that is exactly what it does. So the picture sharpens into something honest. A close-range demolition charge that goes soft when its barrel is too short, against a long-range hammer that arcs like a mortar past 300 yards. 2 tools, 2 jobs. Now watch what happens when those jobs collide with real life. The brush. For varmints and predators in open country, coyotes, hogs spotted across a field, the 5.56 is surgical, flat, and fast. But step into thick timber, after a feral hog or a whitetail inside 200 yards, and the equation inverts. The heavy 7.62 by 39 soft point drives straight through the twigs and brush that deflect a light, hyper-fast 5.56. For medium game in close cover, the Soviet round is the more ethical, more capable choice. For long shots in the open, the American round owns the field, the home. Here lies the most dangerous myth of all, repeated in every comment section. I live in an apartment, so I keep the AK. The 5.56 will go through every wall and kill my neighbor. Backwards. Completely backwards. When a high-velocity 5.56 round slams into half-inch drywall, that impact destabilizes the light bullet. It tumbles, breaks up, and dumps energy fast. It loses its lethality across each barrier. The 7.62 by 39 was engineered by Soviet designers to defeat cover, light armor, and barriers, and it does that job ruthlessly. A 123-grain FMJ can sail through 4 interior walls and still carry enough energy to kill on the far side. Read that again. In a tightly packed neighborhood, the AK round is the over-penetration liability, and the fragmenting 5.6 is the structurally safer choice when it strikes a wall. The wallet. And here is the room where the betrayal becomes a dollar figure. For decades, the 7.62 by 39 held one unbeatable card: price. Before 2021, 1,000 rounds of steel-cased Russian 7.62 ran around $200, 15 to 18 cents a shot. That number alone drove an entire generation of American shooters onto the AK platform. Then, on August 20th, 2021, the U.S. State Department announced a ban on the import of Russian firearms and ammunition tied to the Novichok poisoning of dissident Alexei Navalny, effective September 7th. The pipelines of cheap Tula, Wolf, and Barnaul began to choke off. The war in Ukraine swallowed most remaining Eastern European production, and the price of 7.62 by 39 climbed until it reached rough parity with 5.56. The cheap AK era didn't fade. It was killed by policy, and as prices spiked overnight, the shelves that profited were the ones still stocked. Today, the deep bench of domestic 5.56 manufacturing, dozens of loads, weights, and specialized projectiles, is the more secure long-term supply. The cartridge that was once the people's bargain became a luxury, and almost nobody who bought an AK for the cheap ammo was warned the rug could be pulled by a single press release. So strip away the tribal jerseys. The biggest lie in the rifle industry was never AR versus AK. It was the pretense that these two cartridges were ever competing for the same job. The 7.62 by 39 was forged in the Soviet Union in 1943 for conscript armies fighting in mud, forest, and trench at ranges under 300 meters. Built for volume, for barrier-blind penetration, for brutal reliability in crude rifles caked in filth. It is a brawler. The 5.56 was designed in 1960s America for a professional volunteer force, engineered for combat load, flat trajectory, and fragmentation that takes a man out of the fight at speed. It is a surgical strike. Asking which is better is asking whether a hammer beats a wrench. The honest answer depends entirely on what is being built. A short truck gun, where penetration matters and barrels are stubby. The 7.62 is a masterpiece. A flat-shooting home and distance rifle riding the deepest supply chain in the country. The 5.56 takes the crown. Neither is obsolete. Neither is king. And the shooter who practices will always beat the shooter who only argues. Heritage clothes go back to that surgeon's sentence, the one that started the whole fight. Dr. Pronk didn't write it to win an internet argument. He wrote it standing in the memory of bodies he could and couldn't save, knowing exactly what each round leaves behind. That is the difference between a man who has read the spec sheet and a man who has held the wound. And maybe that's the real reason this channel keeps digging. Because somewhere along the line, the people selling rifles stopped telling the people carrying them the truth. There is no shame in having owned a short carbine and not knowing the number. The shame belongs to the men who knew it and stayed silent to move product. Knowing the number is how a shooter stops being a customer and goes back to being what this country's gun culture was built on. A self-reliant person who understands the tool in their hands down to the grain. If that is who you are or who you're trying to become, then subscribe to HuntForge. Not as a favor, as a declaration that you'd rather hold an inconvenient truth than a comfortable lie. Hit the bell, because the next one cuts even closer to the bone. The 5.56's own replacement is already here. The U.S. Army has officially adopted a new 6.8mm cartridge and a rifle to fire it, and the story of why they're walking away from the round Stoner built is going to make a lot of safes feel suddenly out of date. That's next. Until then, stay sharp, shoot straight, and trust what you can measure.